I think it's safe to say we are all rapidly descending into madness. So I figured it would probably be a good idea for the next game I play to be a game about rapidly descending into madness. This is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and this is going to be a somewhat difficult video for me to make. Typically on this channel I talk about games that have quite a bit of game design going on and have relatively long playthroughs. Hellblade, on the other hand, is a pretty short, pretty mechanically light experience. Also, before I get into this video, you should probably just assume some spoilers from this point forward. Hellblade is a short game, and this video is going to be a little more of an analysis than a review, so if you really want to go into this game blind, maybe don't watch this video first. This game has been out for 3 years. I'm sure you can find some quick reviews to give you a good idea of whether or not you should buy it. This probably isn't going to be that video. We might as well cover the actual gameplay first before we get into some of the more unique things about Hellblade. On its surface, Hellblade basically functions the way that you would expect a third-person action game to function. It has some environmental puzzles, some combat sections that are actually pretty fun, and a handful of boss fights. Most of the environmental puzzles revolve around these rune puzzles, which give you a rune and then have you wander around looking for that rune somewhere in the surrounding environment before the door will open. There are also some that involve these weird illusion gateway things, and sometimes you'll need to examine certain objects from certain angles to piece them back together. All the puzzles are about forcing you to consider reality in a way that you otherwise probably wouldn't, which I assume is part of this game's mental health theming, but we'll cover that a little bit later in this video when we start talking about Senua's character concept. The environmental puzzles of this game are fine. I found them a little bit boring. They probably could have been polished up a little or made a little bit more exciting, but it is what it is, and there are reasons the gameplay took a backseat in Hellblade, which I'll also cover in this video. When you aren't playing minigames out of Viking Sesame Street, you're probably in a combat section. Combat in Hellblade is simple but effective. You've got light attacks, strong attacks. You can also charge enemies and shoulder check them for a stun. And if you block at the right time, you'll perform a counter. Because this game has no HUD and a generally heavily cinematic design, a lot of the action scenes are actually pretty intense to play through. A lot of the time when people use the term cinematic to describe a video game, it's used as a pejorative. The great and eternally sweaty debate about how much games should attempt to replicate movies will continue to rage on, but I think Hellblade does a good job of looking cinematic while still feeling like a game. I felt like I was playing a video game when I played these combat sections. I would say that if you're a developer and you want to create a more cinematic action game, Hellblade would be a very good case study. The other thing I really enjoyed about this game's combat system is that it seems to really fit Senua as a character. Senua is not a very big lady, especially compared to the gigantic Viking freaks she's fighting. Making the combat system revolve around counterattacks gives you the feeling that she's winning these fights based on her skill as a fighter and not her physical strength, which fits her character very well, at least on a physical level. The idea of her being required to throw her entire weight into the body of opponents to upset their footing also plays into this. This game is heavily rooted in Senua as a character, so it's fitting that the combat system would function almost entirely as an extension of her character concept. Senua isn't a giant video game Viking raider with turkey breast fists slamming an axe into her problems. She's an intelligent, skilled fighter that has to outmaneuver her opponents to win, and I think this is absolutely an intentional character choice on the part of the team working on this game. The other part of this game's combat is boss fights, which are also pretty good. I think the best one is probably Valravn. I'm not 100% sure because in my playthrough I had this weird bug where the camera fucked up and then the fight stopped and went into the cutscene of me winning. So I guess if there's anyone out there in the Hellblade speedrun community and I just found the Valravn skip that takes 10 minutes off the world record, you guys are welcome. I also kind of like the giant boar, but I think rendering a full asshole on it probably wasn't necessary. The boss fights are a logical extension of the rest of the combat system. You need to outplay the boar, not fight it on its own terms. I would have liked to see a little bit more of an exploration of bosses and the combat system in general, but like I mentioned with the puzzles, game design kind of wasn't the point of Hellblade. And now that I've mentioned it twice, it's probably time to get into what I mean by that. Hellblade is less of a game and more of a tech demo / character study / public service announcement. At the time of its release, this game was using some of the most advanced motion capture in the industry, especially its facial expression capture, which looks pretty goddamn good. It still looks a little off at times, but this was a huge accomplishment in terms of making a 3D model look like an actual person with actual emotions. This is one of the biggest muscles Ninja Theory wanted to flex during the development of Hellblade, and I would say they executed it basically flawlessly. The second goal of this game was to raise awareness about psychotic mental disorders. Psychotic mental disorders sounds pretty intense because it's a clinical term. You're all probably more familiar with the term schizophrenia, which is the most common form of psychotic mental disorder. One of the key aspects of Senua's character is that for her entire life, she's been suffering from a pretty severe case of something resembling schizophrenia. As you play the game, various voices that Senua hears in her head will taunt you, compliment you, and generally narrate your actions.
We're back. We found her. We found you. We thought we'd lost her. Where have you been? Here she is. Don't worry. We're here to help you. You don't have to do this on your own anymore. You need us. There's a way in.
Into the mountain.
Can you see it?
Shall we tell her where to go?
It's not far. Go on. Look up. Just up there. Listen to us. Shall we?
Does she know which way to look? Does she know her way into the mountain?
She's a good girl, isn't she? Look up. So clever. Did you miss us? Oh, she did. She did.
Are you glad we're back?
She's so glad we're back. Go on. Go up. Go up. Go up into the mountain.
These voices are extremely accurate to what real schizophrenics report to hearing. And if you listen to anything provided by mental health professionals that are attempted recreations of this, it basically sounds identical.
You are the one. I came for you. I came for you because you are the one. It's you. You are the one I came for. You
Stop it.
are the one. It's you. It's you I came for. It's you. It's you.
Look at their
and you
eyes.
have the way.
Look at them.
I
Their
came
eyes are
for
full
you.
of disgust.
You have the way.
You smell. You are disgusting.
We know you.
The level of research and care Ninja Theory took to ensure that Senua's condition was accurately represented to the player is pretty admirable. There are even some things that most people probably won't pick up on. For example, I'm fairly sure the rune puzzles are intended to be an example of the common symptoms some schizophrenics have, where they try to search for hidden messages and meanings in the world around them. I actually have kind of an anecdotal example of this. One guy I knew had an episode where he printed off hundreds and hundreds of pages of mathematics from Wikipedia and was convinced that he had found some sort of hidden code that he could decipher. I think these puzzles are supposed to be a reflection of Senua seeing some sort of code in the world around her that isn't necessarily there. Most importantly, I think, is that Senua is depicted as being more or less functional, capable, and not a dangerous maniac. Like, sure, she hears voices, but she can still complete tasks and live life, and she's never shown to be a danger to the people around her. I assume it's probably really cool for people that have these sorts of illnesses to not be depicted as, like, the fucking Joker for once. I did a little bit of research on this while playing, and apparently some of these symptoms are extremely common. There are estimates that as many as 5 to 15% of adults hear voices as part of a mental illness. That is a shitload of people. The last time I checked, there isn't that many Jokers, so we probably don't need to be scared of mentally ill people. In the credits for the game, you'll even find a link to this site that provides some resources for people that think they or someone they know might be affected by some of these symptoms, which is pretty cool. So I guess if you're watching this video and you currently have voices talking to you in your head, first of all, apparently this isn't even that weird. Second of all, you should probably go to a doctor, and third of all, I'm almost positive you won't turn into the Joker. Senua is a very good example of a character that gets rid of the stigma of having one of these disorders. All of her problems wrestling with her illness come from the people around her not understanding it, and her living in a time period where she has no way of understanding it herself, other than like, maybe it's a curse from the gods or something. Speaking of which, this game is heavily based in Norse mythology, and it made me finally realize how existentially horrifying Norse mythology actually is, because in Norse mythology, Ragnarok basically just means that the gods are also mortal in the long run. Part of Odin's entire character is that he's a god of knowledge, constantly trying to find some way to stop Ragnarok and therefore his own death. Like, in a normal religion, you would go to your god or gods and ask, I just feel like, as a mortal being, this is all pointless. Like, someday I'll be dead, and all my family members will be dead, and what's even the point? And the god or gods would say, it's okay, because someday you'll live eternally in heaven, or join your ancestors in the sky, or some shit. But if you asked Odin, he would just be like, bruh. Same. Anyway, Senua's character design is extremely good. She's one of the most well-written and well-executed characters probably in the history of the medium. I've never seen a game get carried by its main character this hard, and I can probably guarantee you that if Senua would have been some boring generic protagonist, this game would have been a boring tech demo and received basically zero praise. Everything from the combat system to the way her mental illness is portrayed with high levels of accuracy to her actual story arc of coming to terms with her mental illness is done flawlessly. Also, as a man from the Pacific Northwest, I have a certain appreciation for white girls with dreads, so that's also factoring into my appraisal of the character design. In terms of this game's story, it's difficult to track because you really have no fucking clue how much of it is real or not. Senua constantly hallucinates. You have no idea if any of these fights are real, if any of the characters like Druth are real, whether or not the boar ass is real. It's all up for interpretation. Because of this, the ending is pretty predictable, and the reveal has basically zero weight. I won't spoil it because I know at least one of you fucking clowns ignored my spoiler warning and kept watching and will post a comment whining about it if I do, but trust me, when it happens, you're not going to be that shocked. The point is, you have no idea how much of this game is real and how much of the game is just Senua rolling around in the dirt screaming. Yeah, she gets cut up in fights, but she's also shown burning herself, so that's not reliable. The game also never really tells you for sure that this is set within the context of mythology being real in this universe. You have no clue, which I assume is fitting for a game where the main character has an illness that makes reality a little bit more slippery than it otherwise would be. At the end of the day, I think Hellblade is pretty good. It's short, and you should probably buy it on sale unless you really like cinematic, character-driven experiences. It'll definitely make you think about things, and probably look at mental illness in a different light. Also, the trailer for this game's sequel just recently came out, and the trailer sounded like this. If you're anything like me, that's going to make you want to go back and finally pick up the first game. I could probably make an argument that a sequel doesn't really make sense and Senua's character arc is done, but I mean, come on. This video is a little shorter than normal, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but we will be back to a more normal video length in the next one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.